Welcome everyone, thank you for checking out the video today. I want to speak specifically about the hip bridge. Hip bridge is a fantastic exercise, works on core strength, stabilization, posterior chain strength, your lower back, your glutes, your hamstrings, right? You can really specifically target and improve strength and resilience of those areas. I think there's a few key details that I see that are missed as people are, whether it's setting up for their hip bridge exercise or executing, that's causing them to not see the results they're really after. So just to break that down a little bit more specifically, if we are first starting with just simple hip bridges, right? Traditional hip bridge, if we're talking about a bridge as opposed to a hip lift, hip bridge is going to be driving the hips up, holding that 30, 60 more seconds. A very simple variation. I actually use this exercise as an assessment when I first work with the client, just to see what they feel. If I know they're not feeling glutes, hamstrings in that area, they're probably compensating and not setting themselves up in a good position. So oftentimes I see people get up into position, they feel, oh yeah, I feel it right across my lower back, or my hamstring's starting to cramp, or I'm feeling a lot of quads. That just tells me they're not setting up properly, and it's most likely this position, this area of the body right here called the canister, your rib cage, your spine, and your pelvis. So what I recommend when starting the hip bridge and a lot of other core stability exercises like your dead bugs and things like that, is when you're laying on your back here in supine, we want to actually start with some breathing. So if we think about the rib cage right now, the more my rib cage is open and flared, you can usually see this prominence through the rib cage, the more I'm in a degree of lumbar extension. So my lower back is actually arched right off the ground, rather than, and I think a lot of people are doing this whole pelvic tilt thing, it's not really a direction I go to work on positioning of the canister. If you focus specifically on breathing, using that diaphragm, getting the rib cage down, engaging through that abdominal wall, we can really set up this canister in a great position to then execute a better hip bridge. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with some deep breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. If you just feel, without doing anything outside of breathing, what happens to the rib cage as you breathe? As you inhale, rib cage tends to open. As you exhale, rib cage closes down. So for our purposes, it's that long, slow exhale. It allows that rib cage to come down. It takes us out of a position of lumbar extension or lordosis, so we create a better canister between the rib cage, the spine, and the pelvis. So if you just watch a couple breaths here, I'm gonna monitor my rib cage position. Feeling that rib cage come down. This is more flush here now. My ribs aren't flared open and prominent. My rib cage is down, and this is more of a canister or like a can, right? If you're drinking a pop can or drinking a beer, what have you, right? That's the position we're trying to create around the abdominal area. So once I get into that position, rib cage down, I'm going to lightly engage my abdominals. That's going to prevent my rib cage from flaring back up, and I'm just going to try to breathe. I want to expand all the way around, 360 degrees around my core and abdominal area. So not just breathing into the belly. That's what a lot of people only focus on, is breathing into the belly. Proper diaphragmatic breathing happens all the way around the core. So being able to expand outward, being able to expand in the lower back, all that happens at the same time, which properly sets up this canister, creates good pressure throughout that abdominal cavity, and then we can execute our core and hip exercises from there. So rib cage down, core is lightly engaged, expanding, making sure, touching around the core, making sure I'm getting all of that to happen at the same time, and then from there, getting up into hip extension. Continue to breathe. You can see, inflating, 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 and then engaging these posterior chain muscles to hold. So that's the first step right there. That's just getting up into a proper bridge. From there, our next component we really want to focus on is getting full hip extension. If we are not breathing properly, there's a chance if our lower back is arched, our ribs are flared, we get up into, that's as high as I can go. you can see I am not up into this full hip extended position to be more neutral, knees, hips, and shoulders in a straight line. I'm actually, because of my alignment from the beginning, how I'm holding my lower back and my pelvis, it's hard. I'm actually trying to push up. I can't get higher than that just because of my position. So if we can breathe first, get into position, expand into the core abdominal area, rib cage down, all of that stuff, get the hips to the top of the bridge, glancing in a mirror if you have it off to the side, just looking to see, hey, is my knees, hips, and shoulders in a straight line? Am I dropping? Over time, am I getting fatigued and I'm starting to lose the height of my hip bridge? Getting hip extension is so important, and I think people are not focusing enough. People are focusing on, yes, I feel like I'm up as high as possible, but are my hips actually in extension? Right? Extension, when I say that, we're more so looking for neutral. So hips up, knees, hips, and shoulders. If I had a PVC pipe right here, that should create a nice straight line. Shoulders, spine, hips, and knee. That's the goal, getting very close to it. We don't need to be way up here. We don't want to be slouched down here. We want to be nice and long throughout that position. Okay, that's my next thing. The last thing is, and something we can't do with a traditional hip bridge, is that single leg stabilization component. So now, as you really master those, you get the breathing down, the core stability, the setting up of the canister, full hip extension, you build strength in that position. Now we start to add more single leg variations in. So if we were just looking at maybe, we'll say the hip bridge with marching, I'll show you from this angle right here, and not the best angle, but if you go from this position, we want to look at what happens at the pelvis. So just to show you what tends to happen when we lose stability, our hips get up to the top, we march, there is this, you can see, I'm dropping into my pelvis. I'm unable to keep my pelvis level. As I march, pelvis is dropping. That means we're losing stability throughout the core and the hip. So what we want to focus on is, first and foremost, doing all those other things we talked about, being patient with our setup, breathing, rib cage down, core engaged, hips up to the top. Once we get that, it becomes a little bit easier. But then from there, working on that single leg stability component. So as we're at the top, it might mean for you assisting, using the elbows into the ground to start, and just doing a series of mini marches. You can put a foam roller or a PVC pipe or something across your hips just to monitor the levelness throughout the pelvis, because we don't want to be dropping here. You'll know right away if you're dropping. We want to minimize that and try to stay as level and stable as possible. So elbows in the ground can assist. Once you make that harder over time, opposite arm, opposite leg. Hardest, no stabilization from the arms, just have to use the hip in the pelvis, but really focusing on is my pelvis staying level across. I see a lot of people losing stability throughout there. They continue to hammer out single leg hip lifts and hip bridge marching and all of those because it doesn't feel super hard, but you watch them just kind of wiggle from side to side as they lose stability. So I think such a simple exercise, it's almost a foundational exercise, the hip bridge, but when you focus on these individual components, breathing, setting up the canister, full hip extension, pelvis staying level as you're trying to stabilize, you get to the single leg variations. There's so much value in this exercise, but unfortunately, if we always try to progress to the hard exercises without mastering the basics, we tend to overlook and miss these things. So I'm always having to get people, all right, yeah, I understand you're doing ball curls. That's great. That's a good hard core, hip, hamstring exercise. You're not getting right positions. Let's get you back to the hip bridge, right? We have to get people back to really mastering those foundational exercises because that's what's going to carry over to better function, performance, injury reduction long term. If you have any questions at all as it relates to breathing, bridging, hip extension, single leg stabilization, any of those components I went over, feel free to drop a comment below, but I hope you enjoyed the video today and I also hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks everyone.